Have you ever had a moment so humiliating, so shocking, that it literally rewired who you are as a person? I'm talking about the kind of betrayal that doesn't just hurt. It transforms you, forces you to choose between staying broken or becoming something they never saw coming. That's what happened to me on Christmas Eve 3 years ago, when my own brother threw garbage bags at my feet in front of my 5-year-old daughter Emma and told us we didn't belong in the family anymore. The truth is, I couldn't believe someone I'd known my entire life, someone who shared my blood and my memories, could look at an innocent child and call her a mistake with such casual cruelty. But here's the secret nobody tells you about family betrayal. Sometimes the people who destroy you are actually giving you the greatest gift: freedom from ever having to care what they think again. That night, standing in the snow with Emma crying and asking why Uncle Marcus hated us, something clicked inside me that I didn't fully understand until much later. See, everyone expects you to either crumble completely or explode in rage when you're publicly shamed and humiliated like that. They want tears. They want screaming. They want you to give them a reason to say, "See, this is why we don't want her around." But what happens when you do neither? What happens when you go completely silent, walk away with your dignity intact, and start planning something they'll never see coming? The betrayal wasn't just about love or loyalty being stolen from me. It was about discovering that my entire inheritance, my rightful place in our family business, had been lied about and stolen years earlier, while I was too grief-stricken to fight back. Over the next year, I rebuilt my life from a cheap motel room to financial independence, from broken victim to strategic force of nature. During that time, I discovered legal documents proving my brother had manipulated me out of my inheritance. I captured the entire Christmas humiliation on video, and I quietly structured the purchase of the massive debt threatening to destroy the farm he'd built his entire identity around. What they didn't expect was that I held all the power now, and they had absolutely no idea until I walked back onto that property exactly 1 year later, during their biggest celebration of the season, with legal documents that would change everything. Then what happened next wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. It was justice. It was karma. It was me reclaiming every single thing they'd tried to take from me and transforming their cruelty into something that would heal hundreds of families just like mine. But before I tell you how I turned the worst night of my life into my brother's biggest nightmare, before I reveal exactly how someone with $234 in her bank account became the person controlling a multi-million-dollar operation, I need you to understand something crucial. This isn't a story about getting even. This is about what happens when you stop accepting the lie that blood relation means you owe toxic people your dignity, your self-worth, or your silence. This is about the moment you realize that being thrown away isn't an ending. It's an invitation to become the version of yourself that they should have feared all along. And this is about asking yourself the question that changed my entire life. When the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones who destroy you, do you let that define you forever? Or do you use it as fuel to build something they could never imagine? So let me take you back to that Christmas Eve, to the moment garbage bags hit the frozen ground at my feet, to the sound of Emma crying and my brother's voice saying words I can still hear in my sleep. Let me show you exactly what they took from me, what I took back, and how the family that tried to erase me ended up funding their own destruction. Because the truth about betrayal is this: it either breaks you permanently, or it becomes the catalyst for the most powerful transformation of your life. And trust me when I say, they had no idea which version of Sarah Mitchell they'd created when they threw us out that night. What happened next wasn't just payback or vengeance. It was a complete reversal of power that proved something I wish I'd known 30 years earlier. Your worth has nothing to do with whether cruel people can see it, and sometimes the greatest gift they can give you is the freedom to prove them catastrophically wrong. I couldn't believe what I was hearing when my brother Marcus threw those garbage bags at my feet that Christmas Eve. The sound they made hitting the frozen ground still echoes in my mind. A dull, heavy thud that seemed to crush something inside me. "You and that mistake don't belong here anymore, Sarah," he said, his voice cold enough to match the December wind cutting through the open door. Emma, only 5 years old, clutched my leg tighter, her tiny fingers digging into my jeans as if she could somehow stop what was happening. What I realized in that moment was that this wasn't just my brother speaking. This was the family betrayal I'd felt brewing for years, finally exploding in front of everyone I'd once called home. My mother stood behind Marcus in the doorway, her arms crossed, nodding like she'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in her head. "We've carried your burden long enough, Sarah," she added, her words sharper than any knife I'd ever felt. My sister Lauren smirked from the dining room window, holding her wine glass like she was watching some twisted entertainment unfold. They'd planned this. The humiliation, the timing, the cruelty of doing it on Christmas when Emma had been so excited to see her cousins. The violation of trust seemed to pulse through that moment, because these people had cheated me out of what family was supposed to mean. Emma started crying, asking me why Uncle Marcus was being mean, why Grandma wouldn't look at her, why we had to leave. I wanted to scream, to fight back, to show them the rage burning through every cell in my body. But something clicked inside me instead. A cold clarity washed over me like ice water, and I realized that reacting would only give them what they wanted. They wanted me broken, shamed, begging for mercy or exploding in anger so they could justify their cruelty later. But I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Not anymore. I picked up one of those garbage bags, looked Marcus dead in the eyes, and said 7 words I'll never forget. "I'll remember this night, Marcus. Forever." The way his smirk faltered for just a second told me everything I needed to know. He thought this was the end, that he'd finally gotten rid of the family embarrassment. My mother actually rolled her eyes, like I was being dramatic, like my dignity meant nothing compared to their version of what our family should look like. But vengeance wasn't screaming at them or throwing punches. Real revenge is the kind that grows silently, patiently, while your enemies sleep peacefully thinking they've already won. I took Emma's hand, grabbed those bags they'd thrown at me like we were trash, and walked to my car without looking back. The snow crunched under our feet, each step taking us away from the warmth of that house and into the bitter cold of the parking area. Marcus yelled something behind me about good riddance, and I heard Lauren's laughter mixing with the sound of Christmas music still playing inside. Emma asked me if we were bad people, if that's why they didn't want us anymore, and I had to swallow the lump in my throat before answering. "No, baby," I whispered, buckling her into her car seat. "We're not bad, but sometimes people who should love us forget how." As I started the engine and pulled away from that house, I caught a glimpse of them all gathered back inside through the frosted windows, laughing, eating, celebrating like nothing had happened. The backstabbed feeling was overwhelming, but underneath it, something else was building. I'd spent 32 years being the family's punching bag, the cautionary tale, the one they whispered about at gatherings. But as Emma fell asleep against her car seat, exhausted from crying, I made myself a promise that would change everything. That night wasn't going to be the end of my story. It was going to be the beginning of their nightmare, and they had no idea what they'd just started. The drive away from that house felt like I was shedding an old skin, piece by piece, mile by mile. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel, but not from fear, from something else, something that felt almost like power waiting to be born. I'd always been the one who cried, who apologized, who shrunk myself to fit into their narrow definition of acceptable. But tonight, something fundamental had shifted inside me, like a door I didn't even know existed had suddenly swung wide open. The payback I craved wasn't going to be loud or messy. It was going to be strategic, calculated, and absolutely devastating. Emma stirred in the back seat, mumbling something about Santa Claus in her sleep, and my heart cracked all over again. She didn't deserve this. The lies they'd told about her, the shame they'd tried to paint us both with. My daughter was the purest thing in my life, and they'd called her a mistake, an error, something to be discarded like actual garbage. That family drama had reached its breaking point, but instead of shattering me, it was forging me into something harder. I realized then that my silence as I walked away wasn't weakness. It was the most powerful thing I'd ever done. I'd spent years trying to earn their approval, bending over backward to prove I was worthy of belonging. Every insult I'd swallowed, every cruel joke I'd laughed along with, every time I'd made myself smaller so they could feel bigger, all of it came flooding back as I drove through the snowy streets. The truth was crystal clear now. They never intended to accept me, no matter what I did, or how hard I tried. Their betrayal wasn't a sudden decision made that Christmas night. It was a culmination of decades of resentment, jealousy, and cruelty that they'd finally felt comfortable expressing out loud. I thought about all the times my father had defended me before he passed away 3 years ago. He'd been the only one who saw my worth, who believed in me when everyone else treated me like the family disappointment. Now I understood why Marcus had grown so bold after Dad died. There was no one left to protect me. No one to call out their toxic behavior. They'd been waiting for this moment, building up to it, and they thought tonight's humiliation would finally break me completely. But what they didn't understand was that by pushing me out, they'd actually set me free. The silence in the car was thick with possibility, with potential, with the electric charge of something about to change forever. I wasn't crying anymore. I was thinking, planning, calculating every move they'd made against me over the years. Marcus thought he was powerful because he controlled the family business, because Mom deferred to him on everything, because Lauren followed his lead like a loyal puppet. But power isn't just about who shouts the loudest or who can hurt people the most. Real power is quiet, patient, and knows exactly when to strike. As the lights of that house disappeared in my rearview mirror, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. No more begging, no more explaining, no more trying to convince them I deserved basic human dignity and respect. Emma deserved a mother who fought back, who showed her that self-worth isn't given by others. It's claimed and protected fiercely. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that I would reclaim everything they'd tried to take from me. Here's what they never saw coming: how calm I felt about it, how clear the path forward suddenly seemed, like I'd been waiting my entire life for someone to finally push me far enough. I pulled into a gas station about 20 minutes later, needing to check on Emma and gather my thoughts before finding somewhere to spend the night. My phone was still in my coat pocket, and when I pulled it out to search for nearby motels, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. The screen showed a paused video recording, 47 minutes long, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. My hands started trembling as I realized what had happened. Without thinking, my thumb hit record when Marcus first started his tirade, probably as I was instinctively reaching for my phone. I sat there in that freezing parking lot, the engine still running, and pressed play with shaking fingers. There it was, everything, crystal clear, in perfect audio and video quality. Marcus throwing the garbage bags, calling Emma a mistake, my mother's cruel words about being a burden, Lauren's mocking laughter echoing through the doorway. Their deception was captured in stunning detail. Every hateful word, every disgusted expression, every moment of that calculated humiliation. I watched myself stay calm, watched Emma cry, watched them celebrate their cruelty like it was some kind of victory. The karma of the universe seemed to be working in mysterious ways, because this recording was something I never could have planned. I'd been reaching for my phone instinctively when Marcus started yelling, probably hoping to document something, anything, but I'd forgotten all about it in the chaos that followed. Now I had concrete evidence of their betrayal, proof that couldn't be denied or rewritten in their favor later. They couldn't gaslight me about what happened, couldn't claim I was being dramatic or making things up. Every vicious word was right there, preserved forever. I replayed the part where Marcus said, "You and that mistake don't belong here anymore," at least 5 times, watching his face contort with disgust as he looked at my daughter. The rage I'd kept bottled up during the actual confrontation started bubbling to the surface as I sat alone in that car. But alongside the anger was something else, a cold, strategic satisfaction that I now held something powerful in my hands. This wasn't just a personal recording from my own memory. This was leverage, ammunition, evidence that could change everything if used correctly. Emma woke up asking if we were home yet, and I quickly locked my phone screen, not wanting her to see or hear any of that footage again. "Not yet, baby, but we're going somewhere safe tonight," I told her, my voice surprisingly steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. As I pulled back onto the road, searching for the cheapest motel I could find, my mind was already racing ahead. This recording was the first real piece of power I'd ever had against them. The first time I wasn't walking into battle empty-handed, armed with nothing but my word against theirs. Here's what they didn't expect. They had no idea I had this footage. No clue that their carefully staged humiliation had been captured in its entirety. Marcus would sleep soundly tonight, thinking he'd finally rid himself of the family embarrassment, that he'd successfully destroyed what little dignity I had left. But he'd made a critical mistake. He'd underestimated me, assumed I'd slink away into obscurity and never fight back. That recording sitting in my phone felt like a ticking time bomb, and I was the only one who knew it existed. The motel I found that night was the kind of place you don't look at too closely if you want to sleep peacefully. Peeling wallpaper, a musty smell that no amount of air freshener could hide, and a flickering neon sign outside that buzzed like an angry wasp. Emma held my hand tighter as we walked past a group of people smoking outside their rooms, her little face pressed against my side. "Is this our new home, Mommy?" she asked. And I had to swallow hard before answering that it was just for tonight. But the truth was, I had no idea how many nights we'd be spending in places like this before I could rebuild what they'd destroyed. I laid Emma down on the questionable bedspread, using my jacket as an extra layer between her and whatever stories that fabric could tell. She fell asleep quickly, exhausted from crying and confusion, while I sat at the small desk by the window and stared at my laptop screen. My bank account showed $234. That's what 3 decades of family drama and trying to maintain relationships with toxic people had left me with. The humiliation of our situation threatened to overwhelm me, but I refused to let it. This wasn't rock bottom. This was the foundation I'd build everything else upon. I spent that entire night applying for remote jobs, sending out my resume to anyone who might hire someone with my marketing background and desperate situation. By sunrise, I'd applied to 47 different positions, each application feeling like a small act of vengeance against everyone who'd written me off as worthless. My self-worth couldn't be determined by people who'd spent years trying to destroy it. I had to reclaim that myself, piece by piece, application by application. The dignity I'd maintained when walking away from that house needed to be matched by action now, by the hard work of actually building a life independent of their money and approval. 3 days later, still in that same depressing motel room, I got a call back from a digital marketing agency looking for remote content strategists. The interview was conducted over video call while Emma colored quietly on the bed behind me, occasionally visible in the frame. I was honest about my situation without going into detail. Recently separated from toxic family, starting over, highly motivated to prove myself. Something about my desperation must have translated as dedication, because they offered me the position that same day. The payback universe was starting to shift in my favor, even if just slightly. Within 2 weeks, I'd saved enough from my first paycheck to move us into a small studio apartment in a decent neighborhood across town. It wasn't much. We shared a pull-out couch as our bed, and the kitchen was barely bigger than a closet. But it was ours, earned through my own work, without depending on anyone who'd betrayed me. Emma started smiling again, decorating our tiny space with drawings of flowers and rainbows, slowly forgetting the trauma of that Christmas night. I worked during her school hours, and after she went to sleep, sometimes pulling 16-hour days to build up our savings and prove to myself that I could actually do this. Within that first year, I'd impressed my bosses enough to get promoted to senior strategist with a significant raise. I used the extra money to rent a small office space downtown. Nothing fancy, just a single room with a desk and a window. But it was mine. Colleagues started referring clients to me for freelance projects, and slowly, quietly, I was building something real. The cheated feeling of having been pushed out of my family's business and legacy started to fade as I created my own success story. But late at night, when Emma was asleep and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd watch that Christmas video again, not to hurt myself, but to remind myself why I could never, ever go back to being that person who accepted abuse as love. I was organizing old documents one Saturday afternoon when Emma was at her friend's birthday party, sorting through boxes I'd grabbed from storage before leaving that house. Most of it was sentimental junk, old photos, school papers, birthday cards from better times. But then I found a folder I didn't remember packing. Inside were legal documents from 7 years ago, right after my father died. papers I'd signed in a grief-stricken fog while Marcus stood over me explaining how complicated the estate was. I couldn't believe I'd been so naive, so trusting, so utterly blind to what was actually happening in that moment. The papers outlined how I'd supposedly agreed to relinquish my inheritance rights to the family farm in exchange for a one-time payment of $15,000. I remembered signing something back then. Remembered Marcus saying it was just a formality to help with taxes and legal fees, that the farm would always be family property anyway. The lies he'd told me were documented right there in black and white. He'd manipulated me during the lowest point of my life, when I was drowning in grief and couldn't think straight. My father had built that farm from nothing, had always promised it would be split equally among his 3 children. And Marcus had stolen my share while I was too broken to fight back. I sat on my apartment floor surrounded by those papers, my hands shaking with a rage so pure it felt like electricity in my veins. The betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. This wasn't just about Christmas night or years of emotional abuse. This was systematic, calculated theft that had been executed the moment my protector died, and I was vulnerable. Marcus had been planning this for years, probably waiting for Dad to pass so he could finally cut me out completely. My mother had signed as a witness, and Lauren's signature was there too as a notary. They'd all been in on it together. But here's what changed everything. The documents weren't legally sound. I spent the next week consulting with 3 different attorneys, showing them the paperwork, explaining the circumstances under which I'd signed. Every single lawyer told me the same thing. I'd been coerced during a period of extreme emotional distress. The compensation was grossly inadequate for my third of a property now worth over $3 million, and I'd signed without independent legal counsel present, which made the whole agreement challengeable in court. The farm that Marcus had been running as his personal kingdom for the past 7 years was technically still partially mine, and he had no idea his house of cards was built on a foundation that could crumble at any moment. The irony was almost poetic. While Marcus was throwing garbage bags at me and telling me I didn't belong, he was standing on property that was legally still mine. While my mother was calling me a burden, she was living in a house I had rights to. While Lauren was laughing at my humiliation, she was benefiting from assets that had been stolen from me through manipulation and fraud. The justice I'd been craving wasn't just going to be emotional or symbolic. It was going to be legal, binding, and absolutely devastating to the empire they'd built on my stolen inheritance. I made copies of everything, stored originals in a safety deposit box, and began working with one of the attorneys, Rebecca Chen, to build a case. But something told me not to file anything yet, not to show my hand too early, or let them know I'd discovered their fraud. The revenge I wanted required patience, required perfect timing, required them to be comfortable and confident in their victory before I pulled the rug out from under them. That farm was worth millions now, thanks to developments in the surrounding area, and the business Marcus had built using resources that were partially mine. The karma of the situation was beautiful. They'd spent years telling me I was worthless while building their wealth on foundations they'd stolen from me. 3 months after discovering the legal documents, I created an anonymous social media account with a simple username, Reclaiming Dignity. My first post was careful, strategic. I didn't mention names, locations, or identifying details. But I told the story of that Christmas night exactly as it happened. The humiliation, the garbage bags, the child being called a mistake, the family that chose cruelty over compassion. I wrote it in the raw, emotional language of someone still processing trauma. And I ended with a simple question. Have you ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love you most? Within hours, the post had 300 comments from people sharing their own stories. The response was overwhelming in ways I never could have anticipated. People weren't just commenting. They were pouring their hearts out, sharing decades of family betrayal, abuse, and the complicated grief that comes from being rejected by your own blood. I couldn't believe how many others had experienced similar cruelty. How many had been gaslit into thinking they deserved the mistreatment. How many had walked away with nothing but scars and questions. What I realized next was that my story wasn't unique. It was universal. A shared wound that millions carried silently because talking about family drama feels like airing dirty laundry or betraying some sacred code. I started posting more frequently, always anonymously. always carefully avoiding details that could identify me. I shared about the legal manipulation, the stolen inheritance, the years of being treated like the family embarrassment. Each post resonated with thousands of people who'd experienced their own versions of the same betrayal. My follower count grew exponentially. 10,000, 50,000, 200,000. All people who'd been cheated out of love, dignity, or justice by those who should have protected them. The comments section became a support group, a place where people could finally tell their truth without fear of judgment. What started as my personal outlet for processing trauma evolved into something much bigger than revenge or vindication. People were finding healing in the shared experience, validating each other's pain, offering advice and resources for those still trapped in toxic family systems. Lawyers started commenting with information about estate fraud and elder abuse. Therapists offered perspectives on narcissistic family dynamics, and survivors shared their own payback stories, some petty, some profound, all deeply satisfying. I was building a community of people who refused to accept that blood relation justified mistreatment, who understood that sometimes the family you choose is more real than the one you're born into. Attorney Rebecca Chen followed the account and told me it was brilliant strategy, even if I hadn't initially intended it that way. You're creating a public record of family abuse patterns without revealing your identity, she explained during one of our meetings. When we eventually file, this demonstrates a consistent narrative and shows you've been processing this trauma authentically, not fabricating claims for financial gain. The violation of family bonds I'd experienced was now documented through months of posts, comments, and interactions. A digital paper trail that showed the emotional and psychological impact of their betrayal. But more than that, I was gathering an army of supporters who understood exactly what I'd been through. The account grew to 500,000 followers by the time I was ready to make my next move. Media outlets started reaching out, asking if Reclaiming Dignity would be interested in interviews or features, but I declined everything that would require revealing my identity. The power of the platform was in its anonymity, in the fact that it could be anyone's story, everyone's story. Marcus and my family had no idea I was behind it. They weren't the type to engage with social media deeply, and even if they'd seen the posts, they'd never imagine quiet, defeated Sarah could command that kind of attention. Here's what they never expected: how therapeutic it felt to control the narrative for once, to have my voice heard and validated by hundreds of thousands of people who saw through the lies toxic families tell to maintain their power. Attorney Chen called me on a Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee cup freeze halfway to my lips. "Sarah, the farm has significant outstanding debts," she said, her voice carrying that careful tone lawyers use when they're about to drop a bomb. Marcus had taken out multiple loans against the property to expand the business. The debt totaled nearly $800,000, and with recent market downturns and poor management decisions, he was 3 months behind on payments. The bank was considering calling in the debt, which meant the entire operation was vulnerable in ways my brother probably wasn't advertising to anyone. I couldn't believe the karma of it all. The man who'd called me worthless was drowning in financial problems he'd created himself. I'd been building my own business steadily over the past year, taking on bigger clients, making smart investments with every dollar I could save. My freelance marketing agency had grown beyond what I'd imagined possible. And between my savings, a business line of credit, and the viral success of my anonymous platform that had attracted private investors interested in my story, I had resources Marcus would never suspect someone like me could accumulate. When Rebecca explained that I could potentially structure a purchase of the farm's debt from the bank at a significant discount, essentially becoming Marcus's creditor, something clicked into place. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice, about reclaiming what had been stolen from me, about taking back the power they'd stripped away that Christmas night. The process took 6 weeks of careful negotiation, legal maneuvering, and strategic silence. I worked with financial advisors to structure the deal properly. A private investor financed most of the purchase because the note was cheap and the leverage was priceless, with me as the strategic partner and decision-maker. The bank was thrilled to offload a risky loan, and just like that, I became the holder of the farm's financial future. Marcus had no idea that his sister, the one he'd thrown garbage bags at, the one he'd called a burden, the one he'd systematically excluded and humiliated, now controlled whether his entire operation survived or crumbled. Here's what they never saw coming. I wasn't even required to notify him immediately about the debt transfer. According to Rebecca, I could wait until the next payment was due, let him make it to the wrong entity, and then inform him of the change in ownership. But I had something more strategic in mind, something that would maximize the impact of this reversal of power. The betrayal he'd inflicted on me deserved more than just financial consequences. It deserved a public reckoning, a moment where he'd have to face exactly what he'd done and who he'd underestimated. I spent those weeks preparing for the confrontation, gathering every piece of evidence I had: the Christmas video, the fraudulent inheritance documents, the bank statements showing his financial mismanagement, copies of his social media posts where he'd bragged about his business success. Rebecca helped me draft documents that would give me 3 options: force immediate repayment and foreclose on the property, restructure the debt with conditions that would give me partial operational control, or settle for a complete transfer of my rightful inheritance share, plus damages. Each option was designed to be devastating in different ways, and Marcus would have no leverage to negotiate because he'd put himself in this position entirely through his own arrogance and poor decisions. The farm's annual Christmas season opening was coming up in 2 weeks, their biggest event of the year, when they invited the whole community, local press, business partners, and even the mayor to celebrate the holiday season. Marcus always used it as an opportunity to show off his success, to play the role of generous patriarch, to cement his image as a pillar of the community. I hadn't set foot on that property since the night he threw me out, hadn't spoken to any of them since Emma and I drove away into the snow. But this year was going to be different. This year I'd be returning not as the family embarrassment begging for acceptance, but as the person who literally held their entire future in her hands. I drove up to the farm exactly 1 year after they'd thrown me out, and the irony wasn't lost on me that it was the same snowy weather, the same Christmas decorations, the same facade of perfect family harmony. Emma sat beside me in the passenger seat now, a year older, stronger, braver, wearing the red dress I'd bought her specifically for this moment. "Are you scared, Mommy?" she asked as we approached the property. And I told her the truth. I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The parking lot was packed with cars, people laughing and drinking hot cider. The whole community gathered to celebrate with the family that had built their empire on lies and stolen inheritance. Marcus was holding court near the main barn, surrounded by business associates and local politicians, playing his role perfectly. He looked prosperous, confident, completely unaware that the woman walking toward him through the crowd held the keys to his entire kingdom. My mother was beside him. Lauren was taking photos for social media, and for a moment it was like stepping back into a nightmare. Except this time, I wasn't the victim. What I realized in that moment was almost dizzying. A year ago, I'd left here broken and humiliated, and now I was returning with more power than any of them could imagine. The moment Marcus saw me, his face went through a remarkable series of expressions: confusion, recognition, anger, and then something that looked almost like fear. "What the hell are you doing here?" he hissed, stepping away from his group to confront me. My mother's face drained of color, and Lauren actually dropped her phone, the 3 of them forming a wall between me and the festivities as if I was contaminating their perfect event. I couldn't believe how satisfying it felt to watch them scramble, to see the panic in their eyes, to know that for the first time in my entire life, I was the one with leverage. "I'm here on business, Marcus," I said calmly, pulling an envelope from my bag. "You see, I've recently acquired something that belongs to you, or rather, something you thought belonged to you." I handed him the documents showing the debt transfer, watched his eyes scan the pages, saw the exact moment he understood what he was reading, the betrayal he was feeling right now, the shock of realizing he'd been outmaneuvered. It was a fraction of what I'd felt that Christmas night, but it was a start. His hands started shaking as he flipped through the papers, and I savored every second of his mounting panic. "This is impossible," he stammered, looking between me and the documents like one of them had to be fake. "You couldn't. You don't have this kind of money. You were living in a motel." The humiliation in his voice was music to my ears, the realization that he'd completely underestimated me finally sinking in. My mother grabbed the papers from his hands, her face twisting with rage and disbelief. Lauren was frantically Googling something on her phone, probably trying to verify if this was real. The family drama they'd created was about to become very, very public, and they were starting to realize it. People were noticing the commotion now, guests turning to watch the confrontation unfold, whispers spreading through the crowd about who I was and why Marcus looked like he'd seen a ghost. "We need to talk privately," Marcus finally managed, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "This isn't the place." But I cut him off with a smile that felt like reclaiming every ounce of dignity they'd tried to steal from me. "Actually, Marcus, this is exactly the place," I said loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Because I think it's time everyone knew the truth about how this farm really operates, don't you?" The vengeance I'd been planning for a year was finally unfolding, and the look of absolute terror on his face told me he knew there was no way out of this that didn't end with his carefully constructed image shattered. We moved to Marcus's office inside the main house, away from the crowd, but not before half the party, including several journalists and the mayor, had witnessed the tension. Rebecca was on standby via phone, and I'd brought a paralegal named David Torres, who'd help document everything that was about to happen. Marcus slammed the door behind us, his face red with rage, while my mother and Lauren flanked him like soldiers preparing for battle. "You scheming little," he started, but I held up my hand and he actually stopped talking. The power dynamic shift so undeniable that even he recognized it. The truth was about to come out in ways they'd spent years trying to prevent, and there wasn't a single thing they could do to stop it. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "First, you're going to apologize to Emma, publicly, in front of everyone out there, for calling her a mistake and treating her like garbage." I watched my mother's face contort with indignation, but I wasn't finished. "Second, you're going to restore my rightful inheritance that you fraudulently took from me 7 years ago when I was grieving Dad's death. Third, you're going to establish a trust fund for Emma's education and future, funded with the profits you've made using assets that were partially mine. The revenge I'd planned wasn't just about humiliating them. It was about justice, about making them pay for every cruel word and stolen opportunity." Marcus laughed, actually laughed, like I was making some kind of joke. "Or what, Sarah? You'll foreclose on the farm? Destroy everything Dad built?" The way he invoked our father's memory as a shield made my blood boil. He'd betrayed everything Dad stood for the moment he threw his granddaughter out in the snow. "Or I'll do exactly that," I replied, pulling out my phone and showing him the Christmas video for the first time. "And I'll make sure this goes viral right alongside the foreclosure notice. Every news outlet, every social media platform, everyone who thinks you're some upstanding businessman will see exactly who you really are." The color drained from his face as he watched himself on that video, throwing garbage bags at his sister's feet, calling a 5-year-old child a mistake. My mother made a strangled sound, and Lauren tried to grab my phone, but I pulled it away. "I have copies everywhere," I told them calmly. "Cloud storage, Rebecca's office, trusted friends. You can't destroy this evidence no matter what you do to me." What they never expected was that I'd been 10 steps ahead of them this entire time. They'd thought they were dealing with the same broken, desperate Sarah from a year ago. But that woman had died the night they threw her out. "You're trying to blackmail us," my mother spat, her voice shaking with rage. "This is extortion. It's illegal." But Rebecca's voice came through the speakerphone on the desk, cool and professional. "Actually, Mrs. Mitchell, what we're offering is a settlement to avoid litigation. Demanding rightful inheritance and compensation for documented fraud is completely legal. What's illegal is the estate manipulation your son executed 7 years ago." I laid out 3 sets of documents on Marcus's desk, each one representing a different option for how this could end. They could cooperate and retain some dignity, or they could fight and lose everything publicly, spectacularly, and permanently. Marcus sat down heavily in his desk chair, the fight draining out of him as he read through the options. The payback was sweeter than I'd imagined, because it wasn't just about money or property. It was about watching them realize they'd created their own destruction. Every cruel word, every humiliation, every year of making me feel worthless had led to this moment where I held all the cards, and they had none. "You have until the end of this event to decide," I told them, checking my watch. "Sign the agreements and apologize to Emma publicly, or I start making calls to every media contact I've developed over the past year." The karma of the situation was beautiful. They'd thrown me away thinking I was nothing, and I'd used that freedom to become everything they should have feared. 2 hours later, Marcus stood in front of the entire Christmas gathering with a microphone in his shaking hands, his face pale under the festive lights. Emma held my hand tightly as we stood in the crowd, and I could feel her little body trembling with anticipation. "I need to make an important announcement," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "A year ago, I made a terrible mistake. I hurt my sister Sarah and her daughter Emma in ways that were unforgivable." The silence that fell over the crowd was absolute. Every guest straining to hear what came next, confusion and curiosity rippling through the gathering like waves. I called Emma a mistake. I treated them both with cruelty and disrespect, and I threw them out of our family home on Christmas Eve, he continued, each word clearly costing him something. I couldn't believe I was actually watching this happen. Marcus, the golden child, the family king, publicly admitting his betrayal in front of everyone who mattered in his social and business circles. My mother stood off to the side, her face rigid with barely contained fury, while Lauren had disappeared entirely, probably hiding in the house. "Emma, Sarah, I'm truly, deeply sorry for the pain I caused you both. You deserved better, and I failed you completely." Emma looked up at me with wide eyes, and I nodded, giving her permission to respond if she wanted to. "Thank you, Uncle Marcus," she said in her small, clear voice, and I could see several people in the crowd wiping their eyes. But this wasn't about sentiment or forgiveness. This was about public accountability, about making sure everyone witnessed his admission of guilt. The deception and violation of family bonds had been exposed, and no amount of backpedaling or future gaslighting could erase what hundreds of people had just heard him confess. After the apology, we returned to the office where the real business would be conducted. Rebecca had arrived in person now, and Marcus's attorney sat across from us, reviewing the settlement documents with defeated resignation. The papers outlined everything. My full inheritance share restored plus 7 years of accumulated interest, a trust fund for Emma worth $500,000, and my new position as co-owner of the farm with equal decision-making power. Marcus would retain operational control, but any major decisions required my approval, and the financials would be transparent and audited quarterly. "If you violate any terms of this agreement, the entire debt comes due immediately and I foreclose," I explained as they reviewed the final pages. "If you speak negatively about me or Emma to anyone, I release the video and all supporting documentation. If you attempt to manipulate the business to cut me out again, I have legal remedies built into every clause. The vengeance wasn't in destroying them completely. It was in making them live with the constant awareness that their empire existed at my mercy, that the person they'd treated as worthless now controlled their fate." Marcus signed first, his hand shaking so badly he could barely write his name legibly. My mother refused to look at me as she added her signature to the witness line, her lips pressed into a thin line of pure hatred. Lauren signed reluctantly, tears streaming down her face, probably mourning the loss of her comfortable position in the family hierarchy. When it was done, when every signature was in place and Rebecca confirmed the documents were legally binding, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just satisfaction, but genuine peace. The justice I'd fought for wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming my dignity, protecting my daughter's future, and proving that betrayal doesn't have to be the end of your story. As we left that office, documents secured in Rebecca's briefcase, I realized the real power wasn't in what I'd taken from them. It was in what I'd built for myself, while they'd assumed I was too broken to fight back. Over the next 6 months, I began implementing changes that Marcus fought against every step of the way. The first initiative I proposed was transforming part of the farm into a community program for families experiencing homelessness or domestic abuse, a place where they could work, learn skills, and rebuild their lives with dignity. Marcus argued it wasn't profitable, that it would hurt our image, that people would take advantage of our generosity. But I had veto power now, and I used it without hesitation, remembering every night Emma and I had spent in that motel wondering if we'd ever feel safe again. The program started small, 3 families living in renovated cottages on the property's eastern section, working various roles on the farm in exchange for housing, meals, and a small salary. I couldn't believe how quickly word spread about what we were doing, and soon we had applications from families all over the state. News outlets started covering the story, calling it revolutionary social entrepreneurship and praising the farm's commitment to community welfare. Marcus hated every article, every interview, every mention of how his business was being used to help people he considered beneath him. But what they never expected was that the program was actually increasing our revenue. Customers loved supporting a business with a social mission, and our sales grew by 40% in the first year. I hired a family counselor to work on site, offering free therapy sessions to program participants and creating support groups for people recovering from trauma and betrayal. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was building the support system I desperately needed a year ago, right on the property where I'd experienced my worst humiliation. Emma volunteered with the program after school, playing with the other children, showing them that kindness and dignity could exist even after you'd lost everything. The payback I'd initially craved had evolved into something more meaningful. I was breaking the cycle of cruelty that had defined my family for generations. My mother stopped coming to the farm entirely after the first few months, unable to stomach seeing those people living on her precious property. Lauren tried to sabotage the program subtly at first, spreading rumors, making participants feel unwelcome, creating unnecessary bureaucratic obstacles. But I documented everything and threatened legal action based on the settlement terms, and she backed off quickly. Marcus went through the motions of cooperation, but made his disapproval clear in every board meeting, every financial discussion, every interaction we were forced to have. The family drama hadn't disappeared, but the power dynamic had shifted so completely that their disapproval no longer had any effect on me. The farm became known throughout the region, not just for its products, but for its values, for the second chances it offered, for the proof that businesses could be profitable and compassionate simultaneously. I gave interviews about my vision for ethical entrepreneurship, always careful not to reveal too much about my personal story, but dropping enough hints that people could connect the dots. The community of supporters I'd built through my anonymous social media account rallied behind the farm's new mission, with many of them becoming customers and advocates. The karma of the situation was poetic. The place that had represented my deepest shame was now a symbol of hope and dignity for dozens of families. One afternoon, I was walking through the cottages when one of the mothers stopped me with tears in her eyes. "You saved my life," she said simply, holding her daughter's hand. "A year ago, I didn't think we'd survive. Now look at us. We have a home, I have a job, my baby is thriving." I saw myself in her story, saw Emma in her daughter's shy smile, and realized that this transformation wasn't just about the farm or revenge or justice. It was about taking the worst thing that ever happened to me and turning it into the best thing that could happen for others. What I realized next was that in healing their wounds, I was finally healing my own, and the family that had tried to destroy me had unwittingly funded their own redemption. 18 months after reclaiming my power, I made the decision to reveal my identity as the person behind Reclaiming Dignity, the anonymous account that now had over 2 million followers. Rebecca advised against it, warning that it could complicate things legally or personally, but I knew it was time. The truth was that hiding had served its purpose. It had protected me while I was vulnerable, given me space to build strength without interference. But now I was ready to own my story completely, to stand in the light and say, "This is who I am. This is what happened to me. And this is how I fought back." I scheduled the reveal for a live video on the account, and the anticipation in the comments was electric. People had been speculating for months about who was behind the posts, sharing theories and guesses, invested in the mystery as much as the message. When I finally appeared on camera, sitting in my office at the farm with Emma by my side, the response was overwhelming. "My name is Sarah Mitchell," I began, my voice steady, "and for the past year and a half I've been sharing my story of family betrayal, stolen inheritance, and the long road to justice. Today, I want to show you that revenge isn't always loud or destructive. Sometimes it's quiet, strategic, and focused on building something better than what was taken from you." I showed them the farm, introduced them to families in our program, explained how I'd turned my trauma into transformation. Here's what they never expected. How many people already knew. They'd recognized details from my posts, put together the pieces, and had been following my journey in real life without saying anything. Local news picked up the story within hours, and suddenly I was doing interviews, speaking at conferences, being invited to share my experience with audiences who desperately needed to hear that survival was possible. The violation of family bonds I'd experienced became a teaching moment for millions of people navigating their own complicated relationships. Marcus was furious about the revelation, claiming I'd violated our agreement by speaking publicly about the family. But Rebecca shut that down immediately. I hadn't named him specifically in the reveal, hadn't shown his face or shared identifying details without his consent, and my story was protected speech. The betrayal he felt at being exposed, even indirectly, was nothing compared to what he'd put me through. My mother called once, screaming about how I'd humiliated the family. How dare I air our private business? How I was destroying everything Dad built. I listened quietly, and then said, "Dad would be proud of what I'm doing here. You should be ashamed of what you did," and hung up. Emma flourished in ways I never could have imagined that night we left in the snow. She became a junior ambassador for the Farms program, speaking to other children about resilience and kindness, showing them that your circumstances don't define your worth. Watching her confidence grow, seeing her use her voice without fear, knowing she'd never accept the kind of treatment I'd endured for decades. That was the real payback, the ultimate victory. I'd broken a generational cycle of abuse and toxicity, and my daughter would grow up knowing she deserved dignity, respect, and unconditional love. The farm continued to thrive under my vision, and Marcus eventually stepped back from day-to-day operations, unable to stomach working alongside me or supporting the mission I'd created. 2 years after the initial settlement, 3 years after that terrible Christmas night, I bought out his remaining share, becoming the sole owner of the property Dad had always wanted me to have. The justice I'd fought for had come full circle, not through destruction or spite, but through transformation and purpose. Standing on that property during our 3rd annual Christmas celebration, watching families laugh and children play where I'd once been humiliated, I realized something profound. That night Marcus threw garbage bags at my feet wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning of my power, my purpose, and my proof that the people who try to destroy you often end up being the catalyst for your greatest transformation. The final question I posed to my followers in that reveal video still echoes in my mind. When someone betrays you, breaks you, tries to erase you, do you rebuild, or do you walk away forever? The truth is, I did both. I walked away from the toxic family that never valued me, and I rebuilt something infinitely better in its place. The cheated feeling I'd carried for so long transformed into gratitude for the freedom their rejection gave me. Because sometimes the greatest revenge isn't making them pay. It's proving they were wrong about you all along, and building a life so full of purpose and dignity that their opinion becomes irrelevant. That's the legacy I'm leaving, Emma. And that's the message I hope reaches everyone who's ever felt thrown away. Your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value. And sometimes being pushed out is the universe's way of pushing you toward your true destiny. So here's what I need to know from you. Because this isn't just my story. It's a question we all face at some point in our lives. When someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally betrays you, humiliates you, tries to erase your worth and your dignity, what do? Do you walk away and never look back, letting them win by default? Or do you rebuild yourself so completely, so strategically, that you come back holding all the power they thought they'd stripped from you? I want you to comment below and tell me, have you ever experienced family betrayal like this? Have you ever been the one they underestimated? The one they threw away? The one they assumed would just disappear quietly? And here's the deeper question that keeps me up at night. Was what I did revenge? Or was it justice? Because I didn't destroy them. I could have, easily. But instead I transformed something toxic into something healing. I took the farm that represented my deepest shame and turned it into a place where families like mine could rebuild their lives with dignity. Some people tell me I should have just walked away completely, that going back only kept me connected to people who never deserved me. Others say I didn't go far enough, that people like Marcus and my mother should have lost everything for what they did. What do you think? Drop a comment and let me know where you stand, because I genuinely want to hear your perspective on this. If you've got your own story of family drama, betrayal, or the moment you decided enough was enough, share it below. This community has become a place where we don't judge each other for the complicated feelings that come with cutting off toxic family members or choosing to fight back against people who hurt us. Maybe you're still in that motel room phase, wondering if you'll ever recover from what they did to you. Maybe you're years past it and finally ready to talk about it. Or maybe you're planning your own version of what I did, gathering your evidence and waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim your power. Whatever your situation, I want to hear about it, and so does everyone else reading these comments. What I've learned through sharing my story is that we're not alone in this. Millions of people are navigating the same betrayal, the same complicated grief of losing family who never really saw our worth. Your story matters, your pain is valid, and your decision to stay or walk away or fight back is yours alone to make. So tell me, what would you have done in my position? Would you have signed those settlement papers and made them pay? Or would you have foreclosed on everything and walked away clean? Would you have revealed your identity publicly like I did? Or would you have kept the power of anonymity forever? I'm genuinely curious because there's no right answer here. Only what feels true to your own sense of justice and healing. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics or past betrayals you're still processing, do me a favor. Subscribe to this channel and hit that notification bell. I share insights like this regularly. Real stories about reclaiming dignity, understanding toxic family patterns, and building the kind of self-worth that no one can ever take from you again. These aren't superficial feel-good messages. These are deep, sometimes uncomfortable truths about what it really takes to heal from betrayal and come out stronger on the other side. The community here is built on people who refuse to accept that blood relation justifies mistreatment, and I think you belong here. And before you go, I want to leave you with this final thought. That night, Marcus threw those garbage bags at my feet. He thought he was ending my story. He thought he was finally getting rid of the embarrassment, the burden, the sister who didn't measure up to his standards. But what he actually did was set me free from caring what they thought, free from trying to earn love from people incapable of giving it, free to build something so much better than anything I could have had if I'd stayed trapped in that toxic dynamic. So maybe the real question isn't whether you rebuild or walk away. Maybe it's whether you're ready to see betrayal not as your ending, but as your beginning. Comment below, subscribe for more, and remember, your worth isn't determined by people who can't see your value. Now go prove them wrong.